It's February 2nd, 1935, and another remarkable event is about to be uncovered by Ariel, Rebecca, and Ali, the Retrospectors.
In God we trust, and in a jury of 12 good men and true, and also in a weird wooden box that makes a shaky line when you don't tell it the truth. So it was today in history in 1935, the day Leonarde Keeler, inventor of the modern polygraph, demonstrated his lie detector, not at a trade fair or in a lab, but in court at an attempted murder trial.
Yeah, and the town where this takes place of Portage, Wisconsin, is an unlikely place for a big tech breakthrough because Portage is a relatively quiet little town, pretty removed from bustling cities where technological advancements often made headlines.
Yeah. Way to treat our listeners in Portage. I'm sorry, come back if you've come to this episode because we're mentioning your town.
There's probably other groundbreaking developments that have happened in your town. But this was the place where the first functioning polygraph was being put to use in a criminal trial by Leonarde Keeler, who was an ambitious and meticulous inventor. And it was a device that was designed to measure physiological responses such as blood pressure, pulse rate, and respiration that could indicate whether someone was being deceptive. And Keeler had been refining his device for quite some time. He'd even patented a version of it, calling it the Keeler polygraph. And he was really, really eager to demonstrate that it could work in a real-world setting.
Yeah, and this was the trial of Tony Grinano and Cecil Loniello for the attempted murder of a sheriff. This was the first time a polygraph expert had been allowed to testify as an expert witness in court. Keeler ended up addressing the court for 3 hours, explaining that the two men had given physical indications of untruthfulness under questioning, although he kept it quite somber in the court. He emphasised that the test was not infallible and that it should not form the basis of the jury's decision. The case also set a precedent with regards to the admissibility of polygraph evidence because both the defence and the prosecution had agreed beforehand that the results of the test could be submitted as evidence, each believing that they would gain from doing so. In the end, the two men were found guilty. And afterwards, actually, Keeler did a bit of an about face, and although in court he'd been very serious and sober, once the trial was over he was like, yep, that's it folks, this proves it, the polygraph is magic.
Yeah, I mean, the reason Keeler had been called to the courtroom at all was simply because the judge, Clayton F. Van Pelt, was into this stuff. You know, he'd heard about the work of the Scientific Crime Detection Laboratory at Northwestern University, where Keeler was sort of the star professor. He'd been famous in criminology circles since he was a teenager. He was on the front of the LA Times when he was a teenager for having developed alongside his mentor, LA's police chief, August Vollmer, a machine that Vollmer told the Times then would provide, quote, a modified, simplified and humane third degree. And that kind of underlines really how he continued to make his name the whole way through his career, partly by literally appending his name to the device, so it's called the Keeler polygraph, but also just in general going for the sexy stuff, because in fact the science behind the machine had been in place for a while, including in the work of Dr. William Moulton Marston, who was another mentor, along with John Larson, of Leonarde Keeler. But they had wanted to develop a machine as an aid to scientific research. And Keeler saw it as a crime-fighting tool. So no prizes for guessing which approach captured the public's imagination. As I say, the papers just went mad for it and called it the lie detector. He never called it a lie detector.
Yeah, I mean, the device that really kicked everything off was first built by a guy called James McKenzie, who was a Scottish cardiologist who had developed a polygraph basically to detect arrhythmias for people who had heart difficulties. And that device was the inspiration for William Moulton Marston, the prominent Harvard attorney. And he believed that any changes in blood pressure during questioning could indicate that an examinee was acting deceptively during their interrogation by law enforcement.
Yeah, so Marston had invented this blood pressure monitor that could show the link between emotions and blood pressure. He actually went on to invent Wonder Woman. He's the creator of Wonder Woman, and this device was the inspiration for her lasso of truth. This is sort of how he saw it. But, you know, he was using it really very much just in a medical context. And then it was picked up by this guy, John Augustus Larson. He was a young physiologist, and he turned that device into a machine that could monitor a range of physiological responses, including heart rate and breathing pattern, hence the name polygraph. You know, it was measuring all of these different things. And he was working for the Berkeley Police Department in 1920 when Keeler, who at the time was still in high school, Michael, was hired to be his assistant. This was something that you could do in a police department, I guess, in 1920. It was hire a schoolboy to be an assistant to a criminologist. And Keeler was obsessed with Larson's machine, and Larson taught him how to administer it. And the first time it was ever used in real life, actually, was to investigate a string of thefts at College Hall, the female hall of residence for the University of California, Berkeley. And the first person that Larson interviewed was a student victim called Margaret Taylor, who, after clearing of any involvement in the thefts, he went on to marry.
And Larson wasn't the only criminologist having kooky meet cutes over lie machines. Also, Keeler, who developed his machine at Stanford University, met his future wife, Catherine Applegate, in a developmental test for the polygraph. What he used to do, Keeler, is he'd give his test subjects playing cards, ask them to select one, then hooked them up to his machine and presented them with each card in the deck to get them to deny having selected any of them. And obviously, you know, one of them was the real card. And then he'd take that reading of them lying about the card that they had picked up as the baseline lie and build on that. And Catherine Applegate decided to play mind games with him and avoided looking at the card that she selected when she was supposed to be choosing a card. So she wasn't lying. Her denials were true. What a flirt. They married in 1930.
Send her to the electric chair.
Well, I mean, this is where it gets dark.
Yeah, there was a photograph of Keeler and Applegate reenacting this meet cute of theirs over a lie detector machine that accompanied an article in Newsweek about one of the most controversial cases of Keeler's career. And that was a Chicagoan called Joseph Rappaport, who was sitting on death row, convicted of murdering an informant that was set to testify against him. And under pressure from Rappaport's family and the religious community, the then governor, Henry Horner, had already delayed Rappaport's execution 5 times. And Horner told Rappaport's sister that he'd consider one more stay if the condemned man passed a test that was going to be performed on this new device by the lie detection specialist and also his personal friend, Leonarde Keeler. And so just before the scheduled execution, Keeler put Rappaport to the test, and after 2 hours of interrogation, Keeler called the governor with his verdict that Rappaport was guilty, and another 2 hours later, Rappaport went to the electric chair. And the story was obviously like an incredible thing that journalists couldn't resist. But Keeler's colleagues were completely a bit horrified, really, that they'd seen that this, what they regarded as an ethical lapse had occurred, where a test was given on a polygraph machine that led very directly to the execution of a man several hours later. It became this almost a black mark against Keeler later in his life.
Yeah, and I think by this point, a huge gap had opened up between Larson and Keeler. I mean, Larson had really done most of the work in inventing the polygraph. You know, Keeler had refined it, but what Keeler really contributed was not so much scientific, it was this sort of pseudoscience around how to administer and interpret the polygraph. He was using tricks, you know, like playing mind games with suspects, using playing cards, and he sort of developed this idea that you tell the suspect that, you know, they've given a perfect reading and the machine can perfectly tell lies from truth, so they better tell the truth because the machine will know. And he did things like, see, this is where they kind of drifted apart massively, because Larson had dreamt that the polygraph could reduce coerced confessions, spending time in police departments. He saw how police were used to routinely beating up suspects to extract confessions. So he thought if science could be injected into it, that would reduce the brutality of the system, whereas Keeler's methods were sometimes themselves indistinguishable from torture.
Well, just simply knowing that you'll be executed in 2 hours' time if you fail this test is enough, isn't it? Of a context for no control to be applicable.
Yeah, and that's exactly why the accuracy of polygraph testing has been so controversial since the very start of it. You know, there's no evidence that any pattern of physiological reactions is unique to deception. You know, an honest person may be nervous when they're being fully truthful, and a dishonest person may be non-anxious just because they're not an anxious person or they're able to pretend effectively in ways that don't set off the machine. And also, evidence indicates that strategies used to beat polygraph examinations, so-called countermeasures, may be effective. And countermeasures that have been popularized include simple physical movements or the use of pharmacological agents that alter arousal patterns. So people have got very good at beating polygraphs in the first place because they know what's being tested for and they know how to get around it.
Have you ever taken a lie detector?
I haven't. I'd be excited to, not in a Jeremy Kyle type way. I wouldn't want anyone to see my lie detector, but I'd be interested to do it privately to see whether I could cheat it.
I am a good liar. I don't lie very often. It makes me feel bad.
Yes, you do. That's a lie.
Now,
This episode first aired last year exclusively to members of Club Retrospectors.
Join today and unlock a new episode this Sunday.
Patreon.com/retrospectors